Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 31, Quark-Gluon-Plasma. A really interesting field of research, or something that is also tried to observe in hadron colliders or particle colliders in general, is the so-called Quark-Gluon-Plasma. What this is, we want to consider in this episode. So you might have heard it in several episodes again and again that there are these particles called quarks, which the protons and the neutrons are made of, and I also told you that the protons are made of two up quarks and a down quarks. The neutrons are made of two down quarks and an up quark, so they are up and down quarks. But this is only one family of quarks. There are also two other families of quarks: the charm quark, the strange quark, the top quark, and the bottom quark. And except for the top quark, those particles hadronize. But the top quark is really, really heavy and therefore decays immediately, basically. And the other particles, they hadronize, which means that they build compositions of either three quarks or two quarks. Rarely, this could be observed in accelerators. There are also compositions of 4 or 5 quarks, so-called pentaquarks. And they could be observed, but in most times it's really a composition of 3 quarks like protons and neutrons, or 2 quarks. And the compositions of 3 quarks are called baryons, and the compositions of 2 quarks are called mesons. And those quarks are different in this way that they are participating in the strong nuclear interaction. So you might wonder, if you look at the atomic model, you might wonder how can an atomic nucleus, which consists of protons and neutrons, how can they hold together? Because if you look at it, protons are positively charged, so you would assume protons, they repel each other. So how can they hold together? So if you just continue to think it logically, then you would assume, okay, there needs to be some force which is stronger than the electromagnetic force which holds those particles together. And indeed, that's the case. This is the strong nuclear force, which is described by so-called quantum chromodynamics, and which basically states that there you have basically that the foundational particles are not the protons that you could measure in particle accelerators, that they are not point-like particles, but they have some form, they have constituents, and those you called quarks. And these quarks you consider to be elementary particles, and they participate in the strong interaction. And if we look back to electromagnetism, to atoms, electrons and protons, there you see protons are positively charged, electrons are negatively charged, and if they come together in an atom, then this charge is neutralized. Atoms are electrically neutral, and therefore the same occurs in quarks and hadrons. So basically, the individual quarks have a charge under this strong interaction, strong nuclear force, and this charge they bound together in these compositions, and in these compositions this charge is basically neutralized. So out of this core, or out of a proton, this charge would not be present anymore. And those charges are different from the electrical charge, because if you look at the electrical charge, it's basically a one charge. So it's plus or minus, but basically plus and minus is only one coin of the charge. It's like charge and anti-charge, but only one part of it. And for this quarks, you have also a charge, but it's a color charge. Also, you describe it with colors because they are three ways. There are 3 charges basically. There is red, green, and blue. And you like plus and minus, you also have these anti-charges, and this is anti-red, anti-blue, anti-green. So you can try to imagine how anti-green would look like, you have to consider it such. Anti-green would look such that if you put it together with green, then you would get white. And this is basically this neutralizing effect of these color charges. And in baryons and mesons, this really occurs. So if you have this three composition of quarks, then they neutralize themselves in color by being red, green, and blue, and this will get white as a color, and therefore is neutral under these color charges. And if you have a meson, then you have basically the effect that you have a color and an anti-color, which basically leads to the same result, that they are neutral under these color charges. So now you might ask, okay, but if protons and neutrons are neutral under these charges, so how are these charges still, or these forces still acting in holding the atomic nucleus together? And this is just a side note, you have this also with atoms, that although they are electrically neutral, they are there's a dipole moment in these electrons, because the charge is not evenly distributed in the electron, and therefore these charge fluctuations basically lead to a dipole moment, which also will have effects beyond the atom itself, which is basically the reason why atoms that have a certain temperature, or that have a temperature above zero, will radiate some form of radiation. And the same is happening in those protons. There's basically these color charges are not uniformly distributed, and therefore there will also be something like the dipole moment with these electrical charges, which will have results further than those beyond the proton, and therefore will hold the protons together, although they are actually color neutral, so neutral in this strong force. So that was just a side note. What I also want to look into is, if we know electricity, and the way we know it is by certain effects where we can see electrical things occur, and also by the possibility to make atoms be charged. So to just kind of put an electron out of its atomic shell, and then the atom is then an ion basically, and this is a charged version. So there we can see these charges. So we can free up an electron from an atom, and this way we can separate charges and experience those electrical effects. And this does not work in the strong nuclear force. At least not at our energy. So because the reason is this is called quark confinement, and the reason for this is that if that this interaction between quarks, this strong interaction is really, really strong, and so if I try to pull, if I have, for example, let's say I have a meson, a part of quark and anti-quark, and I really try to pull them apart, like I would pull an electron out of an atom and free it up. I would try to do this with quarks, and I would put a much high force on it and pull them apart. But in difference to the electrical force, where the interaction gets weaker as farther they are apart, in the strong interaction it's really getting stronger. So the more I pull them apart, the more energy is between them, and at some point they will just out of the vacuum, a particle and the antiparticle, a quark and an antiquark pair will be produced, which make those two particles that I try to separate, make them two mesons again. So I will not be able to free them up. So there are no free quarks in nature, while we have free electrons in some parts of nature, and they can be in nature. That's not a contradiction, but there are no free quarks in nature, and they can therefore not be observed freely. However, there is this case where you have this, you call it asymptotic freedom, and this occurs because the coupling, which is basically the charge between particles, is dependent on the energy. So this is also true for the electromagnetic force, but for the electromagnetic force, this effect is really not that high, so you would not immediately observe it. But for the strong interaction, this effect is really, really high. And the more energy you have, the higher the energy is, the lower this coupling gets. So if at really, really high energy, this coupling basically vanishes. This is called asymptotic freedom. So when the energies are really, really high, then basically this coupling, this color charge, this strong interaction is not there anymore. You can assume it's of course there, but the coupling is not strong anymore. Is basically vanishing, and so it's they behaving like they would be freely, but like this charge would not exist, and this occurs at really, really high energies. And since high energies are also means short distances, this means that in a proton itself, this is occurring. So in a proton, you have these quarks rather moving around freely, because it's so close that their energies are so high that this asymptotic freedom is achieved, and they move freely inside of this proton. But to get it in a larger scale, you would need to have this energy acting on them. So would need a really, really high energy, and it is and then they would move freely. And as I have stated, this is the strong interaction, and as you know from the electromagnetic interaction, there is an exchange particle, which is the photon. So similarly, in the strong nuclear force, you have this exchange particle, which is the gluon. And the gluon is very similar to the photon, except that the gluon itself can carry charge, so color charge, which the photon does not. The photon does not carry electrical charge. This changes things up a bit, but for our purposes, you can consider it like the photon for the strong nuclear force. So just the mediator of this force. And if you now have this asymptotic freedom, this high energy where the coupling basically vanishes, then you have these quarks and gluons basically freely with another in a substance, basically a plasma. So you have basically this Quark-Gluon-Plasma, kind of like an own phase in which they are together. And it is assumed that shortly after the Big Bang, this was present there, that there was this Quark-Gluon-Plasma, because if you consider the Big Bang theory, there in a certain microseconds after the Big Bang, there of course was a lot of energy in a condensed place, and there was of course this their energy was so high that such a Quark-Gluon-Plasma could occur, and therefore it is assumed that this was present in this part of the Big Bang. Also, it is, as I said in the beginning, in current research, it is really a goal to achieve such a Quark-Gluon-Plasma, even for very short periods of time, in a detector, in a particle accelerator. As I already told you in the last episodes, I would like to give you short insights into my book, Alien Thoughts, my new novel that is out now. It's available on Amazon. So I would like to give you a short excerpt of it, that you can kind of see what the story is all about, what's the content, what is it, and if this is something you might be interested in. All right, let's start. All participants rose respectfully as Boris entered the room. "Be seated," Boris ordered, and sat down as well. "Hank is still busy, but will be here shortly to brief us on the situation." "Ah, here he is already." Hank entered the room. You could tell by the look on his face that he had been working without taking a break for the past few hours. His facial expression did not bode well. Patricia had rarely seen him so tense. He was often very serious, but usually calm and relaxed. But not since she had alerted him to her discovery this morning. "I think it's best if Hank starts reporting on the state of affairs right away." Boris continued, giving Hank the signal to begin. "All right," Hank replied, pausing briefly, during which he connected his neurochip to the computer in the conference room. This allowed him to project from his chip to the screen. "This morning, Patricia and I came across him when we were checking the logs of the refugees. Theodore Freeman. His new neurochip has the expected properties, but the neurochip he had implanted during his time in the rebel areas showed a period of time where the chip was nearly inactive and the fugitive was not subject to mind control." Patricia was confused. Normally she would not interrupt a meeting like this, but she finally wanted to know what it all meant. She blurted out, "Wait a minute. The people in the rebel areas don't have neurochips implanted in them, don't they? That's why we don't have them under mind control, right?" There was a silence for a moment. Hank didn't know how to continue, and he looked inquiring at Boris. Boris nodded. "You can go ahead and fill her in. That's why she's here." If this excerpt caught your interest, I encourage you to get my book Alien Thoughts and to just read on what happened before, what will happen after this, and then I really would enjoy it if you could give me a review of what you've thought about the book. If you have already ordered it and read it, then I really would enjoy your feedback as well. So for this you can either write a review on Amazon, which would be great because this always helps people to other people who might be interested in this book to understand if this book is something for them and get feedback, but also you can write to me at my contact formula at my website sci-faith.de/en/contact. There you can contact me and write me what you think about the book and the feedback you have for me. Thank you. I really appreciate your support. And now let's continue with the podcast. And the reason for this is, of course, that this allows you to investigate matter in extreme conditions and, of course, to get insights in how the Big Bang might have looked, especially in this beginning seconds or microseconds where there is really not, which is still a topic of research because there is not a lot known about these beginning the beginning periods of the Big Bang. And what you understand then, if you just consider such a Quark-Gluon-Plasma, then you know the energies have to be really, really, really high, and really high means that the particles are moving really, really, really fast. And if the particles are moving really, really fast, then you know that maybe relativistic effects are occurring there. And indeed, this is the case. So these are highly relativistic particles, and this leads to really high magnetic fields. Why is this the case? So if you consider electromagnetism, then you will see that the reason why we have magnetism, or what magnetism basically is an affected and relativistic effect of electricity. Because if you know magnetism basically occurs if charges are moving charges basically lead to a magnetic field. But if you now consider the theory of relativity, where it states that no matter what movement you have, the physical reality should be the same, then the question is, what if I move in the same speed as those charges in their reference frame basically? Then basically to me those charges will not move. So in this reference frame I should not see a magnetic field. But in a reference frame where they are moving relatively to me, I should see a magnetic field. But still the physics should be the same. And how to resolve this is basically to transfer these equations from this just electric field in the rest frame of the charges to this different rest frame, and then I see that this electrical field becomes a version of an electric field and some magnetic field. So magnetism actually is a relativistic effect. So if I have highly relativistic particles that are really moving fastly, then of course this immediately will lead to really high magnetic fields. And this was achieved in an experiment recently, where they achieved for a really short time to establish such a Quark-Gluon-Plasma, and then which then built such high magnetic fields, and this was indeed the strongest magnetic field of the world in the universe. It is assumed to have been, but of course, it was only for a really, really short period of time. They had even trouble to measure that this magnetic field really occurred. So they did not even measure the magnetic field itself, but the effect the magnetic field in this short period that it existed had. And therefore, it was of course no danger or nothing like that, but it was an interesting fact that this highest magnetic field in the universe could be produced in such an extreme experiment, also although for a really, really short period of time. So it was just a really really small fraction of a second where this magnetic field was present. So I think there are several ways to interpret these results, also not only in the materialistic, but also in the spiritual, and according to the principle that the creation always reflects on the creator. And especially this part of quark confinement that I was describing in the first part of this episode, as I already also write in my book, this can be nicely related to the Trinity itself, because you have, as you might remember in these hadrons, you have these baryons, which are compositions of three quarks who are really strongly bound together. So you can see this as an illustration of the Trinity and how strongly they are together. They are together and they cannot be separated from one another. You cannot just say this is God and this is not God. No, they are one. They are one in their Godhead, and so this can be an image on this. And also, if you then look to the mesons, then you can see this as an illustration of the covenant of marriage between man and woman, basically of this quark and anti-quark. And also you can see this in itself, since in the Bible, marriage is often considered to be itself an image on Christ and his relationship to his church, where the church is considered to be the bride and he the bridegroom. So you can consider this also as an image on that. So this, I think, is a really powerful illustration that we can find in nature of spiritual concepts, which I think is really fascinating. And what I think also, if you look at this specific experiment where they established this Quark-Gluon-Plasma and these high energies were set free and this high magnetic field was released, I think you can see this also in this interpretation of asymptotic freedom. So first of all, you can see asymptotic freedom also in this Trinity picture. You can see it that although they are strongly bound together and they hold as a unity together, inside of it, like inside of a proton where they can move freely, they can also move freely. So they are not bound in a sense that they are chained, that they cannot move freely anymore. But they are bound together in a way that holds them together, but still in this they are really free. And I think in the same way you can consider it in a healthy marriage to be the case that while you are really bound together as a unity, as scripture also said, you are still free in this unison. So there's this. It might sound contradictory, but there is this relation between freedom and also being tied to being together, being in a covenant, which might look like a contradiction. But here in this image, you see it together, and you see how this can in nature work out together, and therefore also in this spiritual sense work together. And if you then continue to look on this, if you are in this unity, then you can see it also. This releases in this Quark-Gluon-Plasma, this releases high magnetic fields. So it leads to an attraction. So a magnet is always an image of an attraction. Something gets attracted like a magnet attracts iron and so on. So this can be seen that if you are in this unison with each other, then there is an attraction. It's attractive and it attracts, and therefore it has a magnetic effect. So this is really an interesting interpretation, I think, and really encouraging that we know that the more we come together, that we come as one, also as Christians and as the body of Christ, the more this magnetic attraction can basically be released. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast. And then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that, and now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.